Hello, and welcome to Islamic Awakening, the show that delves deeply into issues affecting both Islam and Muslims today. I'm your host, Ahmed Hanif. Today, I'm asking Professor Tariq Ramadan, how will the actions of a few takfiri groups impact Muslims living in Europe? As a result of recent attacks carried out by takfiri radical groups, critics say Islamophobia in Europe is on the rise, and ordinary peaceful Muslims are having to pay the price. Immigrant communities are already being viewed with increasing suspicion in both France and Germany with their significant Muslim populations, and even in the UK. Following the recent incident concerning Charlie Hebdo, a string of attacks have been carried out against Muslims in France. Societies across Western Europe are beginning to divide over how best to deal with the actions of takfiri militants carrying out attacks in their countries. So how should the majority of Muslims deal with such situations? And this, I think, is a very, very important topic here today, because largely you find just a margin, or a marginalized group. I would say margin, a small number of people taking these types of activities, carrying out these type of activities. And we mentioned takfiri. So before we start, I'd like you, Dr. Ramadan, to tell us what takfiri means, what's takfirism, what's its history, and how has it appeared in Europe?
I think it's very important to come to this, because from within our tradition, we have to give an answer and to understand this from within. And it's not new. In fact, in the Islamic tradition, very early on, we had a group called Al-Khawarij. And they are, in fact, exactly, they nurtured the same mindset, which means, in fact, they were setting the limits and deciding who was within as a Muslim and who was outside. To the point that where the people were not sharing their interpretation, or, for example, committing sins, they were put outside. While, in fact, in Islam, when you say I am a Muslim and you acknowledge that there is one God and you are following the footsteps of the Prophet, which is a shahada, you are a Muslim. No one can tell you you are within or outside. And they were just, when you commit a sin, they are telling you you are outside. So takfiri means I have the power to tell you if you are a Muslim or if you are not. To the point where, in history, Al-Khawarij were violent and killing the people they were putting outside. So it's not only a legal decision that you are Muslim or not, it's a political power you give to yourself to decide of the life of the people. And we had this very early in the Islamic tradition, and today we have the marginal groups that are nurturing this by deciding within Muslim majority societies who are the Muslims and who are not. And what is very, very dangerous here is that for some of them, if you are a Muslim, or if you claim to be a Muslim and they decide that you are not, you are even more dangerous than the people who are not Muslims, because you are a danger from within. So your blood is lawful, it's halal to kill you, it's even halal to, because you are more dangerous, and then they go for this. So this is what we can see with Daesh and the so-called Islamic State, what we have now in Iraq and in Syria, and then they have this religious positioning. It's based on the wrong understanding of Islam, very distorted interpretation of some scriptural sources and verses of the Quran, and then this is what we, as Muslims, Shia and Sunni all together, we have to come and say this is not our religion.
Where did it originate? I mean, we know on a historical level, we have the prototype, if one can say that, of the takfiri that goes back to the Khawarij, right? But we can't really say that the Khawarij has led to this. I mean, these are students of the Khawarij. They just represent a trend. You see, where did this new trend originate?
So there are many now. What we know, it's just they are the starting point of this. It's very much to understand this dogmatic understanding of the scriptural sources. So the mindset, which is three things. The first is the literal reading of the scriptural sources. And this is sometimes what is upstream of with the Salafi, or what we call today the Wahhabi understanding. So it's we are right, we read the scriptural sources without putting things into the context, without understanding that the Quran is the very word of God, but it was revealed over 23 years and we have to understand the context. No, they don't do that. So it's a mindset, and then you add to this that you decide who are the people within and who are the people outside. And then we see today that these are trends that are coming back, nurtured with this dogmatic mind and used in political terms. So we need to understand here that it's not only religious understanding that we need to get, it's the political instrumentalization of this mindset into something which is now we can be violent. So they are pushed, and for example, we see that some trends are pushed and also they are instrumentalized. We saw what happened in Afghanistan, we saw what happened in Iraq and in Syria. So there is a political game using them and sometimes pushing them to do things out of their sincerity, of their lack of political understanding.
You mean they could be manipulated?
They are manipulated, yes, quite clearly. So there are people who are working with this, and they are now coming with this understanding, very literal, literalist understanding of Islam. Before, the literalists were not involved in politics. Now they are involved in politics, and they want to set a power that is based on this is the only way to be Muslims today. So the Shia are not Muslims, and within the Sunni tradition, the only true Muslims are the people who are following us, right, and all the others are kuffar, or they are dangerous, and then we have the right to kill them or to eliminate them from within the Muslim.
Is takfirism a movement?
Yes, it's both. It could be a movement, it's a school of thought, it's a movement, and it's a political trend at the same time. So we need to understand it's all this together, and now it's a network of groups around the world. We can find them in the West, we can find them in Africa, we can find them now in the Middle East, or in Asia. So it's also a network. So it's a movement with a political network that we can find, and nurtured by this us versus them within the Muslim community and outside.
When we look at takfirism, we see that, I mean, lots of people are saying this, you know, we see that, for example, there are minority voices, but their voices are loud, you know. We see them being more organized than many of the people in the Muslim community. You know, if you look at, for example, Egypt, we can see that they fill the vacuum, you know, by their level of organization and so forth. What are the social and religious factors within the Muslim community that make them, if one can say, prone to takfirism, or let them give up the default position to the takfiris who take over the discourse about Islam? What are our weaknesses, you know, or drawbacks that lead to them filling that particular void?
I think that the first thing that we need to say here is we should not be misled by the media coverage. They are a very tiny minority and they are marginal. It's not because they are vocal and because they are getting the headline, because they kill, that we need to be misled by saying, oh, they are now everywhere. No, these are still marginal groups. The great majority of the Muslims around the world are rejecting this, and now you are right, they are becoming more structured. And sometimes we need to understand this, is that great powers might use their presence to demonize Islam, to target and stigmatize Muslims. You were talking in your introduction about what is happening in the West. So in fact, there is an objective alliance between these people who want to say you are kuffar, you are against Islam, and some who want today to make Islam the other, the danger, the threat in the West. So they are playing together, and we are caught in between. So the question here is for us to avoid and to refuse to remain the silent majority.
Right.
The majority should speak up now. And we have to be quite clear. As much as we are saying this is against our religion, takfiri, and people have no right to tell us who is a Muslim and who is not, and they have no right to kill innocent people. They have no right to kill innocent people, be them Muslims or not. We have to stand up to say this. We also have to say to the West, we are not naive. We know that there is a political game, that you can use them against us. And in fact, justifying Islamophobia by saying that what is the difference between these people who are extremists and killing innocent people and all the Muslims? So this is why it's also our responsibility to come with two things and two sets of principles. It's the religious principles. It's to be clear about what is Islamic. And what is Islamic doesn't mean that there is only one interpretation. And this is where we don't know how to deal with our own diversity as Muslims, to say to say the truth. That's the reality of it. We so much don't know how to deal with diversity that we end up being divided. And I think that we need to acknowledge first, Shia and Sunni are Muslims, and they don't agree on everything, but that's fine. They are Muslims. Within the Shia tradition, within the Sunni tradition, there are interpretations. There are rationalists and reformists and Sufis, and we have all this. That's fine. We don't have a problem. We have schools of law. We need to deal with our diversity and to set limits. There are things that are not accepted as Islamic. When you kill innocent people, when you do what they are doing, it's not. So this is one thing. On the other side, we need to come with a more sophisticated political discourse by saying, look, there is here a game, which is we need to know who is playing with whom, who is doing what. If you look at what is happening, who is now getting advantage of all what is happening in the Middle East? Who is playing with these people? Why is it, for example, that they were pushed on one way, and now sometimes they were, freedom fighters, for example, in Afghanistan, and the following day they are terrorists? Who is deciding? Who is putting the labels? And we are not naive. If only we know how, for example, some of the great powers in Europe or in the United States of America are playing with this. And we need to say it quite clearly. You know who are the most dangerous Muslims for Muslims? These are the Muslims who are very sincere, religiously speaking, and very naive, politically speaking.
Right. Naive is a good point. Naive is a good word, because I think there's a very interesting thing about takfirism itself. It takes naivety to an art form. What I mean is, their world is black and white.
Exactly. That's true.
We are the white, they are the black. We are the good guys, they are the bad guys. Their belief system, or their belief system is not sophisticated in terms of, it's not intellectual. Okay, it's a literalism.
Exactly.
And literalism, and seeing the world as black and white, and putting yourself forward as the ideal Muslim community. These three things are quite attractive to the masses of people.
Yes, and this is where it's attractive, if and only if we don't come today with teaching a sense of complexity within our community. And at the end, what is needed today to deal with this, to deal with the takfiri, is to get Muslims to be a bit more educated. What you were talking about, it's not to confuse naivety with something which is simplifying Islam. No, Islam is a very simple religion, but Muslims are complex, and the Muslim majority societies are complex, and we have a great deal of diversity and interpretations. We need to come to this. We need to, so in fact, the less we are working at the grassroots level, the more these groups are going to gain ground, because they know how to deal with this.
Yes.
And add to this something which is, when you are socially frustrated, politically no freedom. You're dealing with dictators
Right.
and dictatorships. If you are now having the sense that the West is colonizing you from the cultural side, this cultural hegemony, how are you going to react? This is where they are very powerful because they play with the frustration,
Right.
they play with the lack of freedom, and they use the fact that, look, the West is taking over. So this is where we should stop playing the victims and come to work on the ground. And this is where the scholars are not doing the job, the intellectuals are absent, and we keep on now apologizing. No,
Right.
this is not Islam. Islam is not. Islam is a religion of peace. Yes, Islam is a religion of human beings as well. We deal with human beings. If you don't deal with the frustration of the people, if you don't deal with social justice, if you are not ready to stand up against dictators, you are not doing the job. If, for example, you have Gulf states where there is lots of money, but not so much freedom, that's not going to make it.
Right.
That's not going to change. We are not going to change this mindset, which is now taking over and attracting our young Muslims.
Right.
And the young Muslims in the West, for example, what we have today is to see in France, in Britain, in Germany, some are attracted by this because they don't feel that they are Westerners.
Right.
They don't
They're alienated.
Exactly.
Yes.
In both sides. So they don't have an Islamic answer and they are not accepted as Europeans and they are lost. So we can't just blame them because they are doubly victims. Some of the people who are going to there's groups today and they are following in the footsteps of these trends today are victims.
Right.
And they are first victims of our lack of education and lack of presence. The Muslim institutions are not doing the work. So, you know,
so this is one area that you're saying lack of education. We need to have a greater educational push among Muslim youth to be more critical, to use their intellect more. Are there any other measures that we can take or we should take? I mean, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot is the sophistication of, let's say, Daesh in their productions, their visual productions to attract the youth and so on. Are there other things like this, for example, increase our expertise in social media and things of that effect?
That's very important because they are using, it's Hollywood. It's a movie. And they are attracting them by saying this is where you are going to gain your, being respected and your dignity as human being. And we have to come with another discourse in the West or in the Muslim majority society where we say what is the very meaning of being religious or being spiritual, your dignity. Once again, I remember something that was said by my grandfather when the people wanted to go to Palestine to be killed in the name of justice. Say, be careful. It's very difficult to die in the way of God, but it's more difficult to live in the way of God. So how do you live? How do you stand up? How do you get this sense? So we have to come with this, and this is where education is important. Now it's also important for us to make it clear that as long as we don't have a clear political discourse in the West, we are not going to tackle or to address the frustration of our young Muslims.
What do you mean a clear political discourse? You mean a discourse just among ourselves,
no.
Or also discourse with non-Muslims as well?
With non-Muslims, and for example, when
Yeah.
you were referring to Islamophobia, for example, you say, be careful. If you carry on using what is happening and what is done by a minority to stigmatize a whole community, you are going to pay the price tomorrow. Not only the Muslims. This is a danger for the Western societies. So instead of telling us, these are radicalized young people, and you refuse to discuss your own foreign policy, what you are doing in the Middle East, who you are supporting, your silence about Palestine and not supporting justice. If you don't come to this, don't expect from your young citizens to feel that they are at home. You are destroying the sense of belonging.
Right.
And if they don't have this sense of belonging, they are ending up us versus you. And this is that's wrong. We have to nurture a sense of the sense of belonging to the society. It has to do with addressing the political concerns and the sense of justice. And this is where I think that all the Muslims who just keep apologizing about the fact that Islam is a religion of peace and they don't want to deal with politics are in fact choosing the wrong policy. And this is why we have to come with this discourse. And to be quite clear, Islamophobia is racism, and racism is unacceptable.
Right.
And as long as you accept to stigmatize the Muslims, and in the name of freedom of speech, everything is possible, this is double standard. This is wrong, and it's not going to help. So in fact, you are yourself nurturing the sense of alienation that can nurture this radicalization.
Which brings me to the next question, which is, are they sincere? You know, we talk about politics, right? And the Muslims engaging in politics, and I would assume again, you know, discourse with governments and so forth. Are they sincere? When we look at the Charlie Hebdo affair and people going on marching and so on, we had Hollande with Netanyahu in the front rank, you know, marching. It feeds into this alienation of the Muslim youth when they see that, for example, the problems in Palestine are not being addressed, and it is and the situation in Palestine is being legitimized by his presence in a situation like this, in a march like this. When we see, for example, the media, where, you know, they talk about Islamophobia in a negative sense, but still at the same time support the idea of freedom of speech to insult religion. How could we negotiate with governments when they have this type of
That's a very important point, because you and me as citizens, or when we are living in the West, we have to be very careful not to confuse the people and the targets. First, when we deal with our fellow citizens, the fact that they are scared, they are sincere. We have to deal with the sincerity of the people who are scared, because all what they are saying. So we have to address their fear in a very dignified way. Now we have to be very clear to refuse to deal with those people who are instrumentalizing this fear. And this is where, for example, and I said it quite clearly, all these people, these politicians who came at the forefront and saying they are supporting freedom of speech, and the first of them was Netanyahu, and so many African leaders, they have nothing to do with freedom of expression. They are putting people in jail when they express themselves, and they come to lecture us about freedom of expression. This is where we have to address this by saying this is hypocrisy. And as long as there is hypocrisy, don't expect the people to follow you and to think that you are addressing their concerns. This is one thing. So we have to differentiate between our fellow citizens and to try to explain, and politicians. And the same with the media. And the media are nurturing this sense of, you know, Islamophobia with the discourse, and saying at the same time we are against racism, but they nurture a type of racism. And this is what we as citizens, we have to be vocal. And this is what I'm saying to all the Muslims around the world, and especially in the West. Stop being silent. Don't accept to be put in the silent majority. Now the majority should be vocal and to say we are not naive. This is the Islamic discourse, the religious Islamic discourse, and this is the political discourse, and we are ready to fight for our dignity, not only as Muslims, but as human beings. And this is the future.
This is the future. Thank you very much. That the takfiri phenomenon is a call for us to be more community active, to be more mobilized politically and also on the intellectual level of religion, to be able to oppose this. If you don't do this, we're in big trouble. Sadly, that's all we have time for. I would like to thank Professor Tariq Ramadan and all of you at home. Until next time, goodbye.